Her husband divorced her after she became crippled, calling her a deadweight, unaware she is still a billionaire, then invited her to his wedding with her best friend to humiliate her, but her arrival shocked them all. "You're nothing but a deadweight now." Those were the words Sarah Mitchell heard from her husband as she lay paralyzed in a hospital bed, her legs motionless beneath white sheets. But what he didn't know was that she had already heard something far worse. 3 days earlier, while pretending to sleep, she'd heard him whisper into his phone outside her hospital room, "I wish she had died in that accident. Then everything would be mine." The man she'd loved for 8 years, the man she'd built a life with, was now standing at the foot of her bed with divorce papers in one hand and her best friend's hand in the other. This is the true story of how one woman's worst nightmare became her greatest weapon, and how patience, silence, and strategic planning can be more powerful than any act of revenge. Before we continue, let us know in the comments where you are watching from. We would love to hear from you. And if you are new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. To understand how Sarah Mitchell ended up in that hospital bed, betrayed by the 2 people she trusted most, we need to go back 7 years. Sarah wasn't born into wealth. She grew up in a middle-class family in Portland, Oregon. Her father, Robert Mitchell, owned a small software development company that he'd started in his garage in the early 2000s. It was modest, employing about 15 people, but it was successful enough to send Sarah to a good college and provide a comfortable life. Sarah was brilliant with numbers and had a natural talent for understanding market trends. By the time she was 23, she'd graduated top of her class with a degree in business administration and had already started working alongside her father, helping him expand the company. That's when she met David Williams at a tech conference in Seattle. David was different from the other men she'd met, men who saw her father's company and calculated their opportunities. David was a project manager at a mid-sized firm, hardworking, ambitious, but not from wealth. He came from a family who'd worked multiple jobs to put him through state college. When he looked at Sarah, she believed he saw her, not her father's business, not her potential inheritance, just her. Their relationship moved quickly. Within 6 months, they were engaged. Within a year, they were married in a small ceremony that Sarah insisted on, despite her father's suggestion for something more elaborate. "I don't need a big wedding," she told her father. "I just need to marry the right person." Her father had smiled, but there was something in his eyes that suggested concern, a worry he never quite voiced but Sarah noticed anyway. The first 3 years of their marriage were good. David was supportive, attentive, and seemed genuinely happy. Sarah continued working with her father, and together they grew the company significantly. What had been a 15-person operation was now employing over 200 people with contracts across the West Coast. Then, without warning, Robert Mitchell died. He was only 58. A massive stroke took him while he was in a meeting with potential investors. One moment he was laughing, sharing stories about the early days of the company, and the next he was gone. Sarah was devastated. Her father hadn't just been her business partner, he'd been her closest confidant, her mentor, her anchor. The grief was overwhelming, made worse by the sudden weight of responsibility that fell on her shoulders. Robert had left everything to Sarah. The company, all the assets, the responsibility for 200 employees and their families. At 26 years old, Sarah found herself running a multi-million-dollar technology firm while barely able to get out of bed some mornings from the weight of her grief. David was there through the funeral, holding her hand, speaking to guests, handling logistics she couldn't focus on. For the first month after her father's death, he was exactly the support she needed. Then, about 6 weeks after the funeral, David came to her in the study where she was reviewing financial reports late one evening. "We need to talk," he said, his tone serious. Sarah looked up from the papers spread across her father's old desk, the one she couldn't bring herself to replace. "What's wrong?" David sat down across from her, his posture stiff. "Sarah, you're drowning. Anyone can see it. You're trying to run this entire company while dealing with grief, and it's not sustainable." Sarah felt defensive but tried to keep her voice calm. "I'm managing. It's hard, but I'm getting through it." David leaned forward. "Barely. And that's why I think you should transfer operational control to me. Let me handle the day-to-day management, while you focus on healing. I have management experience, and I'm your husband. This is what partners do." The request caught Sarah completely off guard. This wasn't a conversation about hiring additional help or restructuring the management team. This was David asking her to hand over control of her father's legacy. "David, my father left this company to me because he trusted me to protect it. I can't just hand over control." David's expression hardened. "Your father left it to you because you're his only child, not because you're qualified to run it alone. You're 26 years old, Sarah. You've never managed anything this size without him. I'm trying to help you, but you're too proud to accept it." The words stung, partially because Sarah had her own doubts about whether she was ready for this responsibility. But something about the way David was framing it, as though her father's trust in her was merely circumstantial rather than earned, made her angry. "I appreciate your concern," Sarah said carefully, "but I need to do this. My father spent 20 years building this company. I'm not going to hand it over to anyone, even you, without being absolutely certain it's the right decision." David stood abruptly. "So you don't trust me? Your own husband?" "That's not what I said." "It's exactly what you said." David's voice was rising now. "What kind of marriage is this if you can't trust me with something this important?" Sarah felt tears building but refused to let them fall. "This isn't about trust, David. This is about responsibility. Please try to understand." David stared at her for a long moment, and something in his expression shifted into something she'd never seen before. Something cold and calculating. "Fine," he said quietly. "Have it your way." He walked out of the study, and Sarah sat alone, staring at the financial reports that suddenly felt heavier than before. That conversation marked a turning point in their marriage. David became distant, spending more time away from home, claiming work obligations and networking events. Sarah was too consumed with learning every aspect of the company to notice at first. She worked 16-hour days, attending meetings, reviewing contracts, making decisions that affected hundreds of lives. It was exhausting and terrifying, but slowly, she began to find her footing. Meanwhile, her best friend Jennifer Walsh had been a constant presence. Jennifer and Sarah had met during their freshman year of college and had been inseparable ever since. Jennifer had been Sarah's maid of honor, the person she called when she needed to talk through difficult decisions, the friend who showed up with wine and takeout when Sarah was too stressed to remember to eat. "How are you holding up?" Jennifer asked one evening about 4 months after Robert's death. They were sitting in Sarah's living room, and Sarah had just finished explaining a particularly complex contract negotiation. "I'm managing," Sarah said, the same answer she gave everyone. "It's just a lot." Jennifer's expression was sympathetic. "And how are things with David? He seems stressed lately." Sarah hesitated, unsure how much to share. "We're going through a rough patch. He wanted control of the company, and when I said no, things got tense between us." "That must be hard for him," Jennifer said softly. "Being married to someone so successful and powerful. Some men struggle with that dynamic." The comment struck Sarah as odd. Jennifer had always been supportive of Sarah's ambitions, had celebrated every promotion and achievement. But now there was something in her tone that suggested she was sympathizing more with David than with Sarah. "Marriage is supposed to be a partnership," Sarah said. "He should be proud of what I'm accomplishing, not resentful." "Of course," Jennifer agreed quickly. "I didn't mean it like that. I just meant, it must be complicated for both of you." Sarah let it drop, but the conversation left her feeling unsettled in a way she couldn't quite articulate. 2 weeks later, Sarah had to fly to San Francisco for a crucial investor meeting. It was a 3-day trip that could determine whether the company secured funding for a major expansion her father had been planning before his death. She was nervous but prepared, having spent weeks studying every detail of the proposal. The morning she left, David was still in bed. He mumbled a distracted goodbye without getting up, without wishing her luck, without any of the encouragement she desperately needed. Sarah pushed down her disappointment and focused on the task ahead. The San Francisco meetings went better than expected. By the 3rd day, Sarah had secured commitments from 2 major investors that would allow the company to expand into markets her father had only dreamed about. She felt, for the first time since his death, like she was truly honoring his legacy. She wanted to call David and share the news, wanted to hear pride in his voice, wanted to feel connected to her husband again. Instead, when she tried his phone, it went straight to voicemail. Sarah flew home exhausted but exhilarated, ready to share her success. She arrived at their house late on a Thursday evening to find it dark and empty. A note on the kitchen counter said David was out with friends and would be back late. Sarah went to bed alone, her triumph feeling hollow without anyone to share it with. What Sarah didn't know was that while she'd been in San Francisco, Jennifer had come to visit David. It started innocently enough. Jennifer had texted David saying she'd stopped by to drop off some documents Sarah had left at her apartment. But when she arrived, she found David sitting in the living room with a glass of whiskey, looking miserable. "You look terrible," Jennifer had said, sitting down beside him on the couch. Close enough that their knees touched. "Sarah doesn't trust me," David had said, the alcohol loosening his tongue. "I offer to help manage the company, to be a real partner in her life, and she completely shuts me down. What does that say about our marriage?" Jennifer's hand had found his arm. "It says she doesn't appreciate what she has," Jennifer said softly. "You're incredible, David. You're smart, ambitious, supportive. She's so focused on that company that she can't see what's right in front of her." David had looked at Jennifer then, really looked at her, and something shifted between them. "She's your best friend," David had said, though his conviction was already wavering. "And she's married to the man I've been in love with since college," Jennifer had replied. The confession hung in the air between them. David should have asked her to leave. Should have ended the conversation right there. Instead, he leaned in, and Jennifer had met him halfway. That first kiss was brief, tentative, testing boundaries that should never have been tested. David had pulled back, guilt and shock warring on his face. "We can't do this." "Why not?" Jennifer had asked. "She doesn't appreciate you. She keeps you at a distance." "I see you, David. I see how amazing you are." The second kiss lasted longer. By the third, David had stopped protesting. Over the following months, their affair intensified. They were careful, meeting when Sarah traveled for business, which happened frequently as she worked to expand the company her father had entrusted to her care. They told themselves they weren't doing anything wrong because Sarah was too focused on work to notice her marriage crumbling. They convinced themselves they deserved happiness, even if that happiness was built on deception and betrayal. And slowly, they began to plan. "Divorce her," Jennifer said one night, lying in David's arms in the bed he shared with his wife. "You're entitled to half of everything. Community property laws are clear about that. Half of a multi-million-dollar empire." David mused, the idea taking root in his mind like a seed in fertile soil. "Think about what we could do with that kind of money," Jennifer continued, her fingers tracing patterns on his chest. "We could start fresh somewhere new, build our own company, our own life, away from her shadow." David was quiet for a long moment, calculations running through his mind. "She'd fight it," he said finally. "She'd make it difficult. Drag it out in court for years. Her lawyers would destroy me. Then we wait," Jennifer replied. "We wait for the right opportunity, something that gives us leverage." Neither of them knew that opportunity was coming sooner than they imagined, though not in any way they could have anticipated. 3 weeks later, Sarah left for a business trip to Denver, a meeting with potential investors, a tour of a facility they were considering acquiring. Decisions that required her presence and expertise. The drive from the meeting to the Denver airport should have been routine. Instead, a semi-truck driver fell asleep at the wheel. The collision happened at highway speed. Sarah's car was hit on the passenger side and spun 3 times before slamming into a concrete barrier. Metal crushed like paper. Glass shattered into thousands of pieces that caught the afternoon sun like diamonds. When the paramedics pulled Sarah from the wreckage, she was conscious but barely. Her face was covered in blood from a gash on her forehead. Her ribs screamed with pain. And her legs, she couldn't feel her legs at all. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" the paramedic asked, his face coming into focus above her. "My legs," Sarah whispered, her voice weak. "I can't feel my legs." The trauma center in Denver stabilized her. Multiple broken ribs, severe lacerations, a concussion, and most critically, significant trauma to her lower spine. They wouldn't know the full extent of the spinal damage until the swelling reduced, but the preliminary scans were concerning. They arranged to transfer her to a specialized hospital back home where a team of neurologists could evaluate her condition and determine her prognosis. David received the call while Jennifer was at his apartment. They'd been planning a weekend trip together, something they could disguise as separate obligations to Sarah. David's phone rang, and an unfamiliar number appeared on the screen. "Mr. Williams? This is Denver Memorial Hospital. Your wife has been in a serious car accident. She's stable, but she's being transferred back to Seattle for specialized treatment. You should meet her at Harborview Medical Center." When David hung up, Jennifer was watching him from the doorway. "How bad is it?" she asked, and the question held more calculation than genuine concern. "Bad," David said. "Spinal injury. They don't know yet if she'll walk again." Something passed between them in that moment. An unspoken understanding of what this could mean for their plans. "You should go to the hospital," Jennifer said carefully. "It would look suspicious if you didn't." David nodded, already thinking about how to appear concerned while positioning himself for whatever opportunity might emerge from his wife's tragedy. When David arrived at Harborview Medical Center, Sarah had already been admitted and was sleeping under heavy sedation. A doctor met him in the hallway outside her room, a neurologist named Dr. Patricia Morrison who specialized in spinal injuries. "Mr. Williams, I'm Dr. Morrison. I've been reviewing your wife's scans and medical reports from Denver. The damage to her spine is significant. There's severe swelling around the L1 and L2 vertebrae, and we won't be able to fully assess the extent of the injury until that swelling reduces over the next few days." "Will she walk again?" David asked, the question coming out flat, emotionless. Dr. Morrison studied him for a moment before answering. "It's too early to give a definitive prognosis. The next 72 hours will be critical. We'll monitor the swelling, run additional tests, and consult with our top specialists. I'm cautiously optimistic, but I can't make any promises." David nodded. "Can I see her?" "She's sleeping now. The pain medication is quite strong. But you can sit with her if you'd like." David entered the hospital room and stood at the foot of Sarah's bed, studying her pale face, the bandages covering the gash on her forehead, her body motionless beneath white blankets. He felt nothing. No fear for her recovery. No guilt about the affair he'd been having with her best friend for the past 6 months. No love for the woman he'd promised to cherish in sickness and in health. Only cold calculation about what this meant for his future and Jennifer's future together. He stepped back out into the hallway, pulled out his phone, and called Jennifer. His voice was low as she answered. "I'm at the hospital," he said. "She's sleeping." "How does she look?" Jennifer asked. "Broken," David replied, glancing back through the window at Sarah's still form. "The doctors haven't given me a full report yet, but from what they're saying, the spinal damage is serious." There was a pause on Jennifer's end. "What are you thinking? Honestly?" David lowered his voice even further, turning away from the window. "Part of me wishes she had died in the accident." The words were cold, calculated, cruel. Jennifer was quiet for a moment. "David. No, I mean it," he continued. "If she had died, everything would be mine. No divorce, no fighting over assets, no splitting the company. Just mine. Clean, simple. But she didn't die," Jennifer said quietly. "No," David agreed, frustration bleeding into his voice. "Which means I'm stuck going through a divorce, fighting her lawyers for months or maybe years just to get what should be half mine anyway. The stress, the public attention, all of it. And now, if she's seriously disabled, I look like the terrible husband who abandoned his crippled wife instead of just a man leaving an unhappy marriage." What David didn't know was that inside the hospital room, the sedation had worn off faster than the nurses expected. Sarah had woken up about 5 minutes before David arrived, fighting through the fog of pain medication, her body aching, her legs still terrifyingly numb. She'd been about to press the call button for the nurse when she heard David's voice in the hallway. At first, she thought he was talking to a doctor, discussing her condition with appropriate concern. Then she heard what he was actually saying. "Part of me wishes she had died in the accident." The words cut through the medication fog like a knife. Sarah's entire body went rigid, her breath catching in her throat. If she had died, everything would be mine. Each word was precise, deliberate, revealing a truth about her marriage that Sarah had been too trusting or too naive to see. I'm stuck going through a divorce, fighting her lawyers for months or maybe years. David continued talking, his voice carrying clearly through the partially open door, discussing her potential death with the casual disappointment of someone who just missed a good investment opportunity. Sarah lay perfectly still, her eyes open but unseeing, her mind racing despite the drugs in her system. He'd been planning to divorce her. He'd been waiting for the right opportunity. And now he was disappointed that her accident hadn't been fatal because it would have been more convenient for him if she had simply died. The betrayal was so complete, so comprehensive, that for several moments, Sarah couldn't process it. Her husband, the man she'd loved and trusted and built a life with, had just wished for her death. Then, slowly, beneath the shock and the pain and the crushing sense of betrayal, something else began to build. Something cold and calculating. Something that would require patience and planning and absolute precision. David ended his call and returned to the room. Sarah immediately closed her eyes and controlled her breathing, giving no indication that she was awake or that she'd heard anything. Sarah, David said softly, placing his hand on her arm with manufactured tenderness. I'm here now. Everything's going to be okay. The touch made Sarah's skin crawl, but she didn't move, didn't react, didn't give him any sign that she was conscious and aware and already planning her next move. After a few minutes, David's phone buzzed again, and he stepped back out into the hallway to take another call. Sarah opened her eyes and stared at the ceiling. Her legs were numb. Her body was broken. Her husband wanted her dead. And her best friend was apparently his girlfriend. For a long moment, Sarah felt the weight of it all threatening to crush her. Then she took a breath and began to think strategically. If David wanted to divorce a crippled, helpless woman, she would let him think that's exactly what he was getting. When Dr. Morrison came in 30 minutes later to check on her, Sarah was ready. Doctor, Sarah said, her voice weak but her mind sharp. I need to know the truth. Will I walk again? Dr. Morrison sat down beside the bed, her expression kind but professional. It's still too early to say definitively. The swelling around your spine needs to reduce before we can assess the full extent of the damage. But I've seen your scans, and I'm cautiously optimistic. With intensive physical therapy and time, there's a good chance you'll regain most, if not all, of your mobility. Relief flooded through Sarah, followed immediately by opportunity. Doctor, I need to ask you something unusual. Dr. Morrison's expression shifted to concern. What is it? Sarah took a breath. When my husband comes back, when you talk to him about my condition, I need you to give him a different prognosis. I need you to tell him that the damage is permanent and that I'll never walk again. Dr. Morrison's eyes widened. Mrs. Williams, I can't lie to your husband about your medical condition. That would be completely unethical. I'm not asking you to lie, Sarah said, though they both knew that's exactly what she was asking. I'm asking you to present the worst-case scenario. Tell him that based on the preliminary scans, you believe the damage is irreversible. That's technically possible, isn't it? You said you couldn't be certain until the swelling reduces. The doctor studied Sarah for a long moment. Mrs. Williams, why would you want your husband to believe you're permanently disabled if there's hope for recovery? Sarah met her eyes. Because I need to know who he really is. I overheard something tonight, something that makes me question everything about my marriage. Please, Dr. Morrison. I'm begging you. I need this. There was a long silence. Dr. Morrison was clearly wrestling with the ethics of the request, weighing her professional obligations against the desperation in Sarah's voice. Finally, she nodded slowly. I'll present it as the most likely outcome based on the preliminary findings, she said carefully. But Mrs. Williams, I want you to understand something. Whatever you're planning, whatever you think this will accomplish, deception rarely leads anywhere good. Neither does marrying the wrong person, Sarah replied quietly. When David returned to the hospital room 20 minutes later, Dr. Morrison asked him to step into the hallway to discuss Sarah's prognosis. Sarah listened through the partially open door as the doctor delivered the news with professional gravity. Mr. Williams, I've completed my initial evaluation of your wife's condition. The damage to her spine is severe. Based on the preliminary scans and the location of the injury, I believe the paralysis in her lower extremities will be permanent. She'll likely require a wheelchair for the rest of her life. There was a pause. Sarah held her breath, waiting for David's response. I see, David said, his voice flat. Is there any chance of recovery? Any experimental treatments or therapies we should consider? The question was perfunctory, asked because it was expected, not because he genuinely wanted to explore options. We'll continue to monitor her condition, Dr. Morrison said, and Sarah could hear the careful way she was choosing her words. But I think it's important that you both prepare for the reality that this is likely permanent. Thank you, Doctor, David said. No follow-up questions. No desperation to find alternatives. No emotion whatsoever. Just cold acceptance of information that served his purposes perfectly. Sarah closed her eyes and felt tears slide down her cheeks. Not from grief over her condition, she now knew she would likely walk again. The tears were for the death of her marriage, for the man she thought she'd married versus the man who actually existed, for the friend she trusted who had betrayed her in the most intimate way possible. But beneath the tears, beneath the pain, Sarah's mind was already working. She had been handed an opportunity, and she intended to use it. The next morning, Sarah made a phone call from her hospital bed. She called Thomas Harrison, her father's lawyer who had handled the transition of the company after Robert's death. Harrison had known Sarah since she was a child and had been one of her father's closest friends. Thomas, Sarah said when he answered, her voice still weak from the medication but her words carefully chosen. I need your help with something sensitive. Sarah, my God. I heard about the accident. How are you? I'm alive, Sarah said simply. But I need you to do something for me, and I need you to trust me without asking too many questions. There was a pause on the other end. What do you need? I need you to make my company look bankrupt. Every news outlet needs to report that Mitchell Technologies has collapsed. Total failure. Debts overwhelming assets. The whole company crumbling. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for several seconds. Sarah, do you understand what you're asking? The stock price alone would crash. Your reputation, your father's legacy, none of it will be real. Sarah interrupted. I need you to work with the company's financial team to create the appearance of bankruptcy while protecting every actual asset in structures David can't touch. Trusts, offshore accounts, shell corporations, whatever it takes. But to the outside world, to the media, to anyone investigating, Mitchell Technologies needs to look completely destroyed. May I ask why? Harrison said carefully. I need to know who my husband really is, Sarah said quietly. And I already have my answer. Now I need to protect what my father built before David tries to take half of it in the divorce. There was another long pause. When do you need this done? Immediately, Sarah said. And Thomas, there's one more thing. David and I have a joint account with about $3 million in it. Money I transferred there to cover our household expenses and personal costs. I want you to monitor it, but don't freeze it. Don't protect it. I need to see what he does with it. You're testing him, Harrison said, understanding dawning in his voice. I already know he'll fail, Sarah replied. I just need documentation. Over the next week, Harrison and the company's financial team worked with remarkable efficiency. Press releases went out announcing that Mitchell Technologies had suffered catastrophic losses due to mismanagement following the founder's death. Financial documents were crafted showing insurmountable debt. Analysts were fed information suggesting the company had overextended into risky ventures that had failed spectacularly. Within 5 days, every major business news outlet was covering the story of how Sarah Mitchell, young and inexperienced, had destroyed her father's legacy in less than 2 years. Stock analysts discussed how predictable this outcome had been. Business professors used it as a case study in the dangers of nepotism and inadequate succession planning. None of it was true, but the documentation was flawless, convincing enough to fool even sophisticated investors. While this played out in the media, Sarah remained in the hospital. David visited exactly once more, 3 days after the accident, staying for less than 15 minutes before claiming he had urgent work matters to attend to. He never visited again. On the 7th day after the accident, Harrison called Sarah with news. "He emptied the joint account this morning," Harrison said. "All $3 million. Wire transfer to an account in his name only." Sarah closed her eyes, the confirmation landing like a physical blow even though she'd expected exactly this. Her husband had taken every cent from their joint account while she lay in a hospital bed, paralyzed and supposedly bankrupt. "Thank you, Thomas," Sarah said quietly. "Sarah?" Harrison's voice was gentle. "I'm sorry." "Don't be," Sarah replied. "You're helping me see clearly for the first time in years." That afternoon, David came to the hospital, but he didn't come alone. Jennifer walked beside him, her hand resting possessively on his arm. The sight of them together, her husband and her best friend, standing united against her, confirmed everything Sarah had suspected and prepared for. They entered her hospital room together, and Sarah noticed everything. The way Jennifer's hand tightened on David's arm. The way they stood too close to each other, their bodies angled toward each other with an intimacy that spoke of long practice. The way neither of them looked particularly concerned about her condition. "Sarah," David said, his voice businesslike and cold. "We need to talk." He pulled divorce papers from inside his jacket and dropped them onto her lap with casual cruelty. "Look, there's no point in dragging this out. You can't walk anymore. The doctors were very clear about that being permanent. And according to every news station, your father's company just collapsed. Total bankruptcy." He leaned forward slightly, and his next words were chosen specifically to wound. "I can't spend the rest of my life tied to someone who's broken. Physically broken, financially broken, just completely broken. You understand that, don't you?" Jennifer stepped closer, and Sarah saw something in her former best friend's eyes that looked almost like satisfaction beneath a carefully constructed mask of sympathy. "This really is for the best, Sarah," Jennifer said softly. "You need to focus on your recovery and adjusting to your new reality. David needs to move forward with someone who can actually be a partner to him." The irony of Jennifer calling herself a partner while stealing Sarah's husband wasn't lost on Sarah, but she kept her face carefully neutral, showing nothing of the cold fury building in her chest. "Sign the papers," David said. "Let's end this cleanly so we can all move on." Sarah's hand trembled as she reached for the pen on her bedside table, not from weakness but from the effort of containing everything she wanted to say, every accusation and revelation she was deliberately holding back for the right moment. She signed her name across the bottom of the page without speaking, ending a marriage that had died the moment David wished for her death in a hospital corridor. David took the papers without looking at her face, checked the signature with the efficiency of someone completing a business transaction, then turned to leave. Jennifer paused at the door, glancing back with an expression that might have been pity if it wasn't so clearly triumph. "I hope you find some kind of peace, Sarah," Jennifer said quietly, as if she were doing Sarah a favor. Then they left together, David's arm wrapped around Jennifer's waist, their bodies pressed close as the door clicked shut behind them. Sarah stared at the ceiling for a long moment. Then she pressed the call button for the nurse. When the young woman appeared, Sarah spoke with clarity and determination. "I need to speak to the physical therapy department. I want to start rehabilitation immediately. Whatever it takes, however long it takes, I'm going to walk again." Over the following months, Sarah attacked her recovery with the same focus and determination she'd brought to learning her father's business. The physical therapy was brutal. Her body had suffered severe trauma, and even though the doctors had been cautiously optimistic about her prognosis, the reality of recovery was harder than anything Sarah had ever experienced. Every day began at 6 in the morning with exercises that left her exhausted and in pain. Slowly, feeling began to return to her legs. First just tingling, then genuine sensation, then finally, after weeks of work, movement. Small movements at first, barely noticeable. But Sarah and her physical therapist, a woman named Dr. Rebecca Santos, celebrated each tiny victory. "You're making remarkable progress," Dr. Santos said one morning about 3 months into Sarah's recovery. "At this rate, I think you'll be walking with assistance in another month or 2. "I need to be walking without assistance," Sarah said. "And I need to be able to wear heels." Dr. Santos raised an eyebrow. "That's an ambitious goal. May I ask why heels specifically?" "Because I have somewhere important to be," Sarah replied. And I need to look absolutely perfect when I get there. While Sarah worked on her physical recovery, hidden from public view in a private rehabilitation facility, the divorce proceeded quickly. Sarah didn't contest anything. Didn't fight for assets or make demands. Simply let David walk away with what he thought was a clean break and his $3 million in stolen money. David used that money to start a real estate development company in a city about 2 hours away. Somewhere he and Jennifer could build their new life away from the wreckage of Sarah's supposed destruction. The company was called Williams Development, and David positioned himself as a self-made entrepreneur who'd overcome personal hardship to build something from nothing. He conveniently omitted the $3 million in stolen funds that had financed his fresh start. Jennifer left her job and moved in with David. They were careful not to be too public about their relationship at first, maintaining the fiction that they'd come together only after David's marriage had ended. But within a few months, they were appearing together at business functions, Jennifer by David's side as he networked with investors and potential partners. Williams' development grew steadily over the following year. David was charismatic and convincing, able to sell investors on his vision for luxury residential developments in emerging markets. By the time 12 months had passed since the divorce, he'd secured backing for 3 major projects, and was beginning to make a name for himself in regional real estate circles. Then, one morning about 13 months after the divorce, an envelope arrived at the office David shared with Jennifer. Thick, expensive cream-colored cardstock with gold embossing. Inside was a wedding invitation. David Williams and Jennifer Walsh request the honor of your presence at their wedding. David showed it to Jennifer with satisfaction. We should send one to Sarah, he said. Jennifer looked at him with surprise. Why would we do that? Because, David said slowly, a cruel smile playing at his lips. I want her to see what we've built. I want her to see us happy and successful while she's stuck in that wheelchair with nothing. It's the final proof that we made the right choice. Jennifer considered this. She might not come. Even better if she does, David replied. Everyone we've invited are our investors, our business partners, the people who matter in our new life. If Sarah shows up in her wheelchair, broken and defeated, it just validates everything. It shows everyone exactly what kind of dead weight I escaped from. Jennifer picked up her personal stationery, expensive paper she'd bought to match the wedding invitations. She wrote in her distinctive handwriting. Sarah, we'd be honored if you could join us in celebrating our happiness. We know this past year has been difficult for you, but we wanted to include you in this joyful occasion. The venue is fully accessible for wheelchairs. We made certain of that. We hope to see you there. The cruelty was perfect, expertly crafted to wound while maintaining plausible deniability. They could claim they were being magnanimous, including Sarah in their celebration, while the subtext screamed their triumph over her destruction. When Sarah received the invitation at her rehabilitation facility, she read the note 3 times. Each word was a transparent attempt at humiliation disguised as kindness. Jennifer's handwriting, once so familiar and comforting, now looked like a weapon carefully aimed at Sarah's heart. Sarah picked up her phone and called Thomas Harrison. Book a private jet for next month, she said, and arrange a full security detail. I have a wedding to attend. Harrison was quiet for a moment. Sarah, are you sure about this? Given everything they've done, I'm absolutely certain, Sarah interrupted. Also, I'm going to need you to do something else. I need you to start quietly letting our investors know that Mitchell Technologies never actually failed. Reach out to our key partners, the people who matter. Let them know the bankruptcy was strategic restructuring and that we're about to announce a major expansion. You're going public with the truth? Harrison asked. Partially, Sarah replied. I want the right people to know that I'm not broken, not bankrupt, and definitely not defeated. I want that information to spread through the business community like wildfire. And I want to make sure several of David's current investors hear about it. He's been courting some of our former associates, Harrison said. I've been monitoring his business activities as you requested. He has meetings scheduled with 3 of our investors next month. Perfect, Sarah said. Make sure they know the truth about Mitchell Technologies before those meetings happen. I want David to walk into those rooms thinking he's negotiating from a position of strength, only to discover that everyone knows exactly how he funded his company. Over the next 4 weeks, Sarah intensified her physical therapy even further. Dr. Santos was amazed at her progress and her determination. "You're pushing yourself too hard," Dr. Santos said after one particularly grueling session. "You need to allow your body time to heal." "I don't have time," Sarah replied. "I have a deadline." 3 weeks before the wedding, Sarah walked the length of the rehabilitation facility's therapy room without any assistance. The achievement brought tears to Dr. Santos's eyes and quiet satisfaction to Sarah's. 2 weeks before the wedding, Sarah walked in heels for the first time. Low heels at first, then progressively higher. Her legs shook with the effort, but she forced herself to keep going, to build the strength and balance she would need. 1 week before the wedding, Sarah went shopping. She brought a stylist and a personal shopper to a private boutique and spent an entire afternoon selecting the perfect outfit. "What's the occasion?" the stylist asked as Sarah tried on her 5th gown. "A wedding," Sarah replied, studying herself in the mirror. The gown was stunning, a deep midnight blue that shimmered like water when she moved. It was elegant, powerful, and absolutely perfect. "You look incredible," the stylist said. "The bride is going to hate you." Sarah smiled. "That's exactly what I'm counting on." On the day of David and Jennifer's wedding, Sarah's private jet landed at the small municipal airport near their city. The plane's arrival was noted by ground crews who recognized the Mitchell Technologies tail number and started making phone calls to friends in the business community. Inside the wedding venue, 300 guests filled rows of white chairs. David's investors and business partners, people he'd spent the last year cultivating relationships with, all gathered to celebrate his new beginning. In the bridal suite, Jennifer stood in front of a full-length mirror, adjusting her veil. The dress had cost $40,000, an expense that had seemed justified when David's company was growing and successful. Now, with some of their investors asking uncomfortable questions about the source of his startup funding, the expense felt reckless. "Do you think she'll actually come?" Jennifer asked, her voice tight with anxiety she was trying to hide. David was checking his reflection in a mirror across the room, adjusting his tie for the 3rd time. "Probably not. She's too proud to let people see her like that, broken, paralyzed, bankrupt. But if she does show up, it only makes us look better. Everyone will see the difference between a dead weight and a real partnership." He turned to Jennifer, forcing confidence he didn't entirely feel. "Besides, even if she comes, what can she do? She's in a wheelchair. She's lost everything. We have all the power here." Jennifer nodded, but her hands were shaking slightly as she picked up her bouquet. The ceremony was minutes from starting when the commotion began. Someone near the entrance made a sound, something between a gasp and a choke, loud enough that people in the nearby rows turned to look. Then another guest turned. Then another. The whispers started rippling through the assembled crowd like wind through wheat. "Is that who I think it is? Oh my God, is she walking? How is that possible? I thought she was paralyzed. Wait, isn't that Sarah Mitchell?" The string quartet faltered in the middle of their prelude. One violinist missed a note, then another, until the music died entirely as all 4 musicians stopped playing and turned to stare at the entrance. David felt it before he saw it. The shift in the room's energy. The way every head was turning toward the doors. The sudden silence that fell over 300 people like a heavy blanket. He turned, irritation flashing across his face that someone would disrupt his wedding. Then he froze. The doors stood open. Sarah Mitchell walked through them. Walked. Not in a wheelchair. Not using a cane or walker. Not struggling or limping or showing any sign of the permanent disability the doctors had supposedly diagnosed 13 months ago. She walked on legs that moved with perfect grace and confidence, wearing a midnight blue gown that caught the light with every step and probably cost more than the entire wedding budget. Her hair was styled in elegant waves that framed her face perfectly, and she was surrounded by 6 men in dark suits who moved with the precision of professional security detail. Sarah walked down the aisle, the same aisle Jennifer was supposed to walk down in 10 minutes, and every eye in the venue followed her. The whispers grew louder, people pulling out phones, frantically texting or searching for information. "That's Sarah Mitchell. I thought her company went bankrupt. She's walking." The report said she'd never walk again. Wait, I just got an email from Mitchell Technologies. They're announcing a major expansion. Oh God, David's face. Someone should have warned him. David's face had drained of all color. His mouth opened and closed without sound as his brain struggled to process what he was seeing. This wasn't possible. Sarah was supposed to be paralyzed. Supposed to be bankrupt. Supposed to be broken and defeated and completely destroyed. Beside him, Jennifer swayed on her feet, her $40,000 bouquet trembling in hands that had gone numb. Her carefully applied makeup couldn't hide the shock and growing horror in her eyes. Sarah reached the front of the venue and stopped, her eyes finding David across the crowded space. Her expression was serene, composed, and absolutely terrifying in its calm. The master of ceremonies, a nervous young man who'd been hired to keep the wedding running smoothly, approached Sarah with a microphone, his hands visibly shaking. "Ms. Mitchell," he stammered, "we weren't expecting you. Would you like to say a few words?" Sarah's fingers closed around the microphone with practiced ease, the gesture natural and commanding in a way that suggested she'd addressed much larger audiences than this one. Her security detail positioned themselves discreetly behind her, a subtle reminder that she wasn't here as a supplicant but as someone with resources and power. She turned to face the assembled guests and smiled. "Thank you," she said, her voice clear and strong, carrying to every corner of the venue. "I apologize for the interruption, but when I received the invitation to this wedding, I felt compelled to attend. You see, I believe it's important to witness moments of truth, and today we're all going to witness several important truths." She paused, letting the silence build, watching as more phones emerged from pockets and purses, as investors and business partners leaned forward in their seats, as the realization began to dawn on multiple faces that something significant was about to happen. 13 months ago, Sarah continued, her voice steady and clear, I was in a car accident. Severe spinal trauma. The doctors initially thought I might never walk again. My husband at the time, the groom standing before you, visited me in the hospital exactly once after the accident. Her eyes found David, who looked like he might be sick. During that visit, I overheard him on the phone outside my room. He was talking to his girlfriend, telling her that he wished I had died in the accident. Because, you see, if I had died, he could inherit my father's company without the inconvenience of divorce proceedings. The gasps rippled through the crowd like a wave. Several people in the front rows turned to stare at David with expressions of shock and disgust. Jennifer, standing beside the altar in her expensive wedding gown, looked like she might faint. That girlfriend, Sarah continued calmly, was my best friend since college. The woman who is currently wearing a white dress and planning to marry the man who wished for my death. She turned to address the crowd more fully. What my husband didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that I heard every word. And in that moment, I made several decisions. Sarah's smile never wavered, though her eyes were hard as diamonds. First, I asked my doctors to tell him my condition was permanent and irreversible. I wanted to see what kind of man I'd married. Would he stay by my side during recovery? Would he support me through the hardest time of my life? Or would he abandon me when I needed him most? She paused. He chose to abandon me. He divorced me while I lay in a hospital bed, calling me a crippled deadweight in front of medical staff. He took every cent from our joint account, $3 million, and left me with nothing. David tried to speak, to object, but his voice came out as barely a whisper. The company was bankrupt. You had nothing. Ah, yes, Sarah said, her voice sharp now. The bankruptcy. That was my second decision. You see, I instructed my lawyers and financial team to create the appearance of total financial collapse. Every news outlet reported it. Every analyst believed it. And most importantly, you believed it. She gestured to her security detail. But Mitchell Technologies never actually failed. Every asset was protected in structures you couldn't touch. Every employee kept their job. Every contract was honored. The bankruptcy was theater, performed specifically for an audience of 2 people who were planning to steal half of my father's legacy. The crowd was completely silent now, every eye fixed on Sarah. Several investors had gone pale, clearly recognizing the implications of what she was revealing. The $3 million David took from our joint account, Sarah continued. That was a test. Money I left deliberately accessible to see if he would steal from someone he believed was paralyzed and bankrupt. He took every cent within hours of the bankruptcy news breaking. That $3 million financed the company he's spent the last year building, the company he's told everyone he started from nothing. She turned back to David, whose face had gone from white to a sickly gray. That company you've been running, David, the one you've told everyone represents your own hard work and business acumen, was built entirely on money you stole from your disabled wife. Money you took while I was lying in a hospital bed fighting to regain the ability to walk. Sarah addressed the crowd again, her voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. I'm here today not for revenge, though I won't pretend this doesn't feel deeply satisfying. I'm here to deliver a message about character, about loyalty, about what happens when you abandon people during their darkest moments and build your success on cruelty and theft. She paused, letting her words sink in. Never trust a man who abandons his wife in a hospital bed. Never trust a woman who betrays her best friend for a man. And never build a business relationship with people whose foundation is betrayal, because if they'll do it to someone they promise to love, they'll certainly do it to you. Throughout the venue, phones were now openly recording. Social media posts were being written in real time. Several of David's key investors were already standing up, making their way toward the exits while speaking urgently into their phones. One man in the third row, a major investor in Williams Development, stood up abruptly. David, we need to talk about our contract immediately. I want documentation on the source of your startup capital within 24 hours. Another investor rose. The loan we discussed for your next project is off the table. We don't do business with people who operate this way. Then another. And another. Within minutes, the carefully constructed network of business relationships David had spent a year building was dissolving in real time. Jennifer grabbed David's arm, her face streaked with tears that had destroyed her carefully applied makeup. David, do something. Make them understand. Tell them she's lying. But there was nothing to say. Sarah had the receipts, the documentation, the proof of every claim she'd made. David's face was a mask of desperation as he watched his business empire crumble before his eyes. Sarah handed the microphone back to the master of ceremonies, who took it with trembling hands. She turned to leave, her security detail falling into formation around her, and walked back down the aisle with her head high and her steps confident. The crowd parted before her like water. As she passed, several people who recognized her from business circles nodded with respect. One woman, an investor Sarah had worked with on her father's projects, actually started clapping. Others joined in, a scattered applause that grew as Sarah made her way toward the exit. Behind her, Sarah heard Jennifer's voice rising in panic, heard David trying desperately to explain, to convince people that Sarah was exaggerating or manipulating the truth. But the damage was done. The truth was out. And no amount of explanation could change what everyone had just witnessed. Sarah reached her car, settling into the back seat as her driver pulled away from the venue. Through the back window, she could see police cars approaching. Someone had apparently reported the theft of the $3 million, likely one of David's now former investors looking to distance themselves from potential fraud charges. Sarah pulled out her phone and called Thomas Harrison. It's done, she said simply. I'm watching it unfold across social media, Harrison replied, something like admiration in his voice. Every business news outlet is picking up the story. Williams Development is finished. Several partners have already announced they're pulling out, and there are calls for investigation into the source of his startup funding. The district attorney's office has apparently opened an inquiry into potential fraud. Good, Sarah said quietly. How do you feel? Harrison asked. Sarah considered the question as her car merged onto the highway, carrying her away from the wedding that had transformed into a reckoning. Away from the people who'd betrayed her. Toward a future that was entirely her own. Free, she said finally. I feel free. And Thomas, there's one more thing. I want to announce tomorrow that Mitchell Technologies is not only solvent but expanding. I want to make it clear to everyone that my father's legacy not only survived but thrived. And I want to personally reach out to every single investor who pulled out of David's projects and offer them legitimate opportunities with a company that's built on integrity instead of theft. Consider it done, Harrison said. You know, your father would be proud of you. Not just for what you accomplished today, but for how you did it. With patience, strategy, and perfect timing. Sarah felt tears building but refused to let them fall. I learned from the best, she said quietly. The next morning, the story had spread beyond business circles into mainstream media. Tech heiress walks again, exposes ex-husband's fraud at his wedding, was the most common headline. Sarah's face was everywhere. The security footage from the wedding venue showing her confident walk down the aisle had gone viral. David's company collapsed within 48 hours. Every investor pulled out. Every contract was cancelled. The $3 million he'd stolen became the focus of a criminal investigation. Within a week, he'd been arrested on charges of fraud and theft. Jennifer's life fell apart just as quickly. Her reputation destroyed by association, she found herself unemployable in any professional capacity. The woman who'd stolen her best friend's husband became a cautionary tale about betrayal and greed. Sarah, meanwhile, returned to running her father's company with renewed purpose. The revelation that Mitchell Technologies had never actually failed, that the bankruptcy had been a strategic fiction, became its own story. Business professors taught it as a masterclass in protecting assets during divorce. Investors who'd written off the company scrambled to rebuild relationships. Within 6 months, the company had expanded into 3 new markets and doubled its workforce. Sarah used her newfound public platform to speak about resilience, about the importance of surrounding yourself with trustworthy people, about the patience required to see justice done properly. She became an advocate for spinal injury research, funding initiatives that helped others who'd suffered similar traumas. And she never married again. Not because she was bitter or afraid, but because she'd learned to be complete on her own terms, to build a life that didn't require anyone else's validation or approval. 3 years after the wedding, Sarah received a letter. It was from Jennifer, written from the small apartment she now lived in, working a job far beneath her education and experience because her reputation preceded her wherever she went. The letter was full of apologies, explanations, and pleas for forgiveness. Sarah read it once, then filed it away without responding. Some betrayals were too profound for forgiveness. Some lessons needed to remain learned. David served 18 months in prison for fraud. When he was released, he tried to rebuild his reputation, to start over in a different city under a different name. But the internet never forgets, and neither do the business communities he tried to infiltrate. He ended up working in sales for someone else's company, his dreams of being an entrepreneur destroyed by his own greed and cruelty. As for Sarah, she continued to thrive. She expanded her father's company into a technology empire that rivaled the biggest names in Silicon Valley. She funded scholarships for students from modest backgrounds, remembering the young man she'd once loved who'd come from nothing and twisted that experience into justification for taking what wasn't his. She built a life of purpose and meaning and success, a life that honored her father's legacy while creating her own. And sometimes, late at night, when Sarah walked through her house on legs that doctors had said would never work again, she thought about that moment in the hospital when she'd overheard David wishing for her death. That moment could have destroyed her. Instead, it had revealed the truth and given her the information she needed to protect herself, to plan carefully, and to emerge stronger than before. The greatest revenge, Sarah learned, wasn't cruelty or public humiliation, though the wedding confrontation had certainly provided both. The greatest revenge was building a life so successful, so meaningful, so absolutely complete that the people who tried to destroy you became irrelevant. David and Jennifer had wanted her broken, paralyzed, and poor. Instead, Sarah Mitchell stood tall, walked confidently, and built an empire. They'd wished for her death and gotten her resurrection. And that, Sarah thought, was the most perfect justice of all. So what did you think of Sarah's story? How would you have handled discovering your husband wished for your death? Would you have had the patience to plan as carefully as Sarah did, or would you have confronted them immediately? And what about Jennifer's betrayal? Can a friendship that deep ever truly be rebuilt after such deception? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, if it made you think about trust and betrayal and the power of patience, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe because we've got more powerful stories coming that will challenge the way you think about loyalty, justice, and what it truly means to rise above those who try to bring you down. Thanks for watching, and remember, sometimes the best revenge is not just moving on, but moving up.